Welcome to Conversations in the Time of Quarantine. Today, we are pleased to have special guest Jim Reynolds, best known as Abe Carver on Days of Our Lives, here with our friend, Advisory Council member Charles Shaughnessy, for a conversation about life, work, the pandemic's impact on their daily lives, and yes, working together on the Days of Our Lives set. As many of you know, today is Giving Tuesday, a day that encourages people to do good and to build a world in which the catalytic power of generosity is at the heart of the society we build together, unlocking dignity, opportunity, and equity around the globe. We hope you will join the movement and give to a cause you care about today. With a deep understanding of how traumatic experiences can negatively affect behavior and well-being, RFK Children's Action Corps places safety, collaboration, and connection at the center of our work with young people. Themes that resonate for all of us, perhaps now more than ever, as we wrestle with really the collective trauma of a global pandemic and a worldwide reckoning on race. So our kids are in good hands, thanks to supporters and friends like Charlie and Jim and all of you. RFK Children's Action Corps would be grateful for your support as we continue to stick with our kids through the pandemic. Previously, we shared news of the formal affiliation between RFK Children's Action Corps and the Dr. Franklin Perkins School. We look forward to having Michael Ames, now the president and CEO for both organizations, join us on a future show to talk about what this affiliation means for the 2,000 children, youth, and adults served annually throughout New England by the combined organizations, in addition to the tens of thousands more positively impacted by the RFK National Resource Center for Juvenile Justice. Thank you all for being here with us. Charlie and Jim, let's begin the conversation.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, and welcome to everyone to Conversations in the Time of Quarantine. So my guest, I'm so excited that this gentleman has agreed to be on the show. He's a dear old friend of mine, old as in long time, a friend of mine. He has so many hats that he wears. He started as a journalist. He served in Vietnam in the Marines. He's an actor, a producer, a writer, a director. He's been recognized as a businessman in his community of South Pasadena. He and his wife, Lisa Lang, run a theater, the Fremont Center Theater there. So he's a theater owner as well. He's a humanitarian, a philanthropist, an all-round terrific guy. He has the distinction of, you probably know him best as Abe Carver on Days of Our Lives, who moved up the ranks from a humble captain to actually running the city of Salem. He's the mayor of Salem now. Quite an upward trajectory. And has a distinction of being the longest, I think I'm right in saying this, I'll ask him when he comes on, the longest running African-American character on network television. He's been playing Abe now for 40 years, I think, and that's the longest running character, African-American character. He also was the first African-American actor to win a daytime Emmy for Best Actor in a Daytime Drama. And only the second actor of any color to win, day's actor, to win Best Actor. The first was McDonald Carey about 40 years earlier. So extraordinarily accomplished man. And it's my great pleasure to introduce him here to you today. Please welcome James Reynolds.
Well, hello. Well,
and there he is.
How you doing?
I'm doing great, Jim. Thank you.
I may be your oldest chronological friend as well. Just
you what?
Just in pure age, I may be the oldest.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, well, we're a couple of old farts. You were you weren't just Shane Donovan's best bud in Salem. When I arrived at the ISA. Yes. Abe Carver with the Salem PD. We sort of teamed up together, but you and I sort of spent a lot of time off the set together.
We did.
You and Lisa, your wife, and my wife Susie. In fact, that was the first. I think we all went. The four of us went on my first grown-up vacation with another couple ever. You remember that? We all went to the Cayman
I
Islands.
do.
We decided we wanted some sun. You wanted to go deep sea fishing. We wanted to go learn scuba diving, and we went to the Cayman Islands and had a wonderful week, or like 10 days there, I remember.
Oh, we had a great time. We had a great time. No, we think about and talk about that trip quite a bit. And
Yeah.
yeah, I do remember our we went deep sea fishing once, and you and Lisa went diving a couple of times, I think.
Right.
And Susan and I read on the beach while you were both off diving in the ocean. And I do very vividly remember our fishing trip, because you and I had drank quite a bit the night before.
Right. Right. It was not a great way
as you could get.
Yeah.
And they would come and wake us up
idea.
and tell us we caught a fish.
Right. I remember, do you remember we got down to the pier at like, we had to wake up at like 4 a.m, hungover, and we staggered down to the pier. We found out where we went to get the boat, and we found the boat, and we were looking for the captain, and this guy came down the jetty in a captain's hat and a blazer, and he got like 10 yards from us, and with the rum, you could smell the rum off him. He was absolutely blottoed, and he came on. He's like, "Oh, you're coming on my boat? Let's go on the boat." And you and I looked at him and said, "We're not getting on a boat with this guy. We're not driving off into the ocean with this man." And we kept trying to explain to him that we didn't think it was safe to go with him. That he had clearly been drinking. And we just didn't know what to do. We were about to like see if we could get our money back. And this other guy in the captain's hat came down the ramp and went, "Shoo, go away."
Yeah.
Oh, don't worry about him. He's crazy. He just tries this with everyone. And we were relieved it wasn't our captain. It was a lot of fun.
And they never saw that boat again.
That's right. It's true.
One of the mysteries of the Bermuda Triangle.
It's true. What I was going to say is, one of the things that struck me, and I don't, we can talk about this, loop back into this, but it's always interested me, and I was wondering how you felt about this, how, there's this qualification, because you are an actor, and you've done this extraordinary work and created this character, and yes, there's a kind of pride with being the first African-American actor to win the daytime Emmy for lead actor and to have that longevity. But does it sometimes irk you that there has to be that qualification?
Yes, absolutely. I've had that qualification on a number of things through my life, and I wasn't the first. In fact, part of my speech was to mention the 3 names of actors of color who won before me, and I thought that was a very, very important thing to do, to remind the people in that audience and the people watching that this is sadly so rare that now there are only 4, and the irony of that sometimes is not lost on me, certainly. No, I feel that was what I wanted to point out. That in 45 years, the last Days actor to win was McDonald Carey, and he won in 1975. And I was in 2018. But that's the show. But as far as actors of color, A. Martinez won, I think, in the early 90s, 91, 92. Once again, I'm in 2017. How many possibilities were there in between that? Not just for me, but for others, Christophe St. John, to name somebody else, and several others. And there was an actor, Darnell Williams, who won in the 80s, and Al Freeman Jr., who was the first to win back in the 70s. And so to have these things measured on the first, the second, this far into our history is unfortunate. And you do have conflicting thoughts. You're happy, you're overjoyed, you're proud, all of those things. But at the same time, there's a responsibility, I think, to show people that, no, this should not be this rare. This should not be noted for its rarity.
Exactly. That should not be a qualification. And I wonder whether you think you know, because this conversation is obviously, for better or for worse, become far more topical since this administration that
Yeah.
we've been under. And I'm one of those that think that in a sort of perverse way, it's been a benefit that the rock has lifted. It's not like this is anything new. It's just that the rock has
Yes.
been lifted,
Yeah.
and we've seen it. And in some ways, the conversation is moving a little forward. I'd like to think that there's a sort of backlash, but the conversation's moving. And I wonder whether you think in time, this sort of attrition, where more and more actors, academics, politicians of color pop up and appear and be successful, and it becomes more mainstream. Will it just sort of be a gentle paradigm shift where it is no longer a topic of conversation, or is it going to need some kind of proactive movement? Do you know what I mean? Like a kind of action, proactive action.
Well, it
Or
does.
do you think
It needs yeah, absolutely needs a proactive movement. You can't sit back and assume something's going to happen, because it won't, as long as you sit back. And things when you're dealing with issues of race, when you're dealing with issues of bigotry and prejudice, in however it manifests itself, either in racism or religious bigotry or any number of nationalities. You're dealing with something that's held so quietly inside a person that it becomes very, very difficult to make it aware, basically to make society aware of it, and make that individual aware of it. Now, ever since the summer with the shooting of George Floyd, which was so clear and so obvious, and the racism was crystal. There were more people, and you saw those groups protesting, and I saw something that I never thought I'd see. I saw multi-ethnic people in the street protesting racism. And even back in the 60s, when the civil rights movement was at its zenith and other things were going on, you know, the protests were integrated, but never to the degree that they were this time. Never to the degree. And part of that is because society itself has grown more diverse. And I think by society growing more diverse, our opinions of each other has changed over time. But inside all of us is that person that we all have to constantly be aware of.
Right.
And it's that person that doesn't necessarily hate, but misunderstands and judges based on something obvious, the color of someone's skin, someone's religion, someone's background. And that's what has been exposed, I think, over this past summer. On the other side of that, what's been exposed over the last 4 years, a great deal. But one of those is that this undercurrent of racism that was always there. It's always been there. And if you remember, after Obama's election, there were all these columns written about being in a post-racial society. Well, we weren't in a post-racial society at all. We just happened to have a very charismatic, very qualified human being that ended up being president of the United States. And it made us think, oh, well, we've turned the corner now. We're good.
Right. It was like Scalia, who's, you know, and again, it's the qualification. Well, now we've got a black president. We've obviously turned the corner and there's no more racism. And so Scalia used that as a way to roll back the Voting Rights Act by saying it's no longer necessary because, look, we're post-racist. I wonder whether, too, in this last 4 years, one of the things that I felt shifted, it's a kind of subtle shift, is that it became a white person's problem. It's always been seen as a person of color's problem.
Yes.
And I think for the first time we recognize that this is our problem, and we're not going to do it by looking outwards and trying to make things better for communities of color. We have to deal with why that's necessary in the first place. And I think that video of the woman, that the bird watching in Central Park,
Yes.
the one calling the police. For me, that was as shocking in some ways as George Floyd, because it showed how easy and how unconsciously white people hold this as a kind of gun at their hip, an invisible weapon at their hip, without even thinking it. That woman probably would never have seen herself as racist on any other day.
And denied that she was.
Sorry?
And she denied that she was.
Right. She said, "I'm not a racist.
Yes.
I give to the NAACP or something."
Right.
And probably believed it. And that was what, for me, what changed was that white people went, "Oh my God, I see what this has been about. It's not about them. It's about us. And it's about this entrenched white patriarchal society that we've just kind of taken for granted and not even recognized is there." And I'm hoping that will move the needle a bit
Well,
further.
you hope so. Yes, most people will deny that they're racist, and they'll deny it vehemently that they're racist in any way. But you know, if the situation, you take the same situation and put it in a different place with different people, and the reaction is different. And what she probably never sat down to think about, would she have reacted in that way had that man been white? No, she wouldn't have. She absolutely wouldn't have. Now, whether she will ever admit it to herself, I don't know, but she wouldn't have. And all these other instances that have been happening around the country, you know, thank goodness for Steve Jobs and Apple and the iPhone, because now the population understands and realizes, not only with law enforcement what's been going on, but with the public in general, because we can take it now. We can show it back to you. And this is exactly what happened. You didn't believe me before. Look, this is what happened. And
it's like candid camera.
We haven't had that tool before.
Yeah, right. It's candid camera, you know, for real. It's like the kind of real life version.
Exactly.
And you actually wrote a play, is that right? Or you wrote a play, I2M America, right?
Yeah.
And that was a one-man show, and that was sort of following the African American experience through our history. Was that right? Would you tell us how that came about? How did
Well, it came about because I love history. I love history. I love American history, African American history, and it's long frustrated me that people don't know about American history to begin with, but they also don't know specifically African American history. They don't know the history of other groups that have contributed mightily. And I was just reading in the LA Times that there's a real struggle going on now with the Board of Education and others in trying to set a curriculum that actually includes the contribution of so many people, for want of a better term, minority people in American history who made tremendous contributions to this country, and this country wouldn't exist without it. And so when I began thinking of something that I wanted to do, something as an actor that I wanted to control, because you just don't. You're auditioning for something, and if you can produce it, fine. If you can't, then you have to audition some more. And I wanted something that I could take out and really bring a message. Obviously, you want to make money and get paid, but I wanted something that would bring a message. And I felt a play based on African American history would do that, but also based on people that are just people. They weren't great statesmen. They weren't tremendously well-known scientists. They were human beings. They were people who went along their daily lives and yet contributed so much to the history of this country and so much to the history of African Americans in general. And so that's where I2M America came from. And it was an eye-opening experience. I've done it a lot. I've done it actually probably 100 performances of it around the country and this country and Canada. And it's been, and I usually do a Q&A after to talk to people. And I'm fascinated. And, you know, truthfully, African Americans don't know that history.
Oh, like, for instance, I learned the other day that over 50% of the Cowboys in the Wild West were
absolutely we're Black. And there's a reason for that. And people should realize that. And I love Westerns, and that might give rise to it. I read a lot of those books when I was young. But people should realize we were agrarian people. We worked on the plantations and the farms and the ranches. So when freedom came and people decided to go west, that they had to start fresh in a different location, they brought those skills with them. They brought the skills that you knew how to work with cattle, the skills that knew how to grow crops, all of those things that came with them. Even in the South, the planters, the slave owners, knew the areas of Africa that specific tribes and specific people would come from. So they knew who had experience growing tobacco. They knew who knew how to grow, certain crops, because they lived in a part of Africa where those crops were well known.
Right.
So the fact that a huge percentage of cowboys were Black was astounding. Another huge percentage was Mexican, the vaqueros, and all those contributions are really erased from history. And a lot of that responsibility, truthfully, you and I have made a pretty good life off of Hollywood, but Hollywood is responsible for a lot of that. If you go to almost anything, any Western, and I love Westerns, we watch at least one episode of Gunsmoke almost daily, just because we like it and it's well done and all of that. Yeah. But look at those shows. There's nobody Black in those shows. Right. Or so rarely are you there.
And when there was, it was the big joke in Mel Brooks. It was the big blazing saddles joke. Yeah. And he did, and it was like, oh, that's ridiculous.
It was ridiculous. And Mel Brooks was spoofing just exactly that. Right. Mexicans are portrayed usually as bandits or peasants or ignorant. Right. The Asians are cooks and servants or some misguided noble person.
But it goes to what we're saying. It's because it's against the narrative of America. Yes. Is this, white, male, Christian, self-determination kind of nation. So, and in fact, after the Civil War, when the slaves were freed, because, as you say, they had all those skills, they very quickly became very successful in the communities they built. And so the white didn't like that. It's like, and white tried to wipe that. I mean, Reconstruction was this disaster because everything that Lincoln hoped would be in place for the freed slaves so they could build community just challenged that narrative. And so,
absolutely.
Andrew Johnson, rather, had to annihilate it all.
Yeah. And with some cooperation of then the Liberal Party, the
the Democrats, where they were the Democrats were the big bad guys. That's what's so confusing these days. Is they were
I know. They switched roles in the 1940s and 50s. Right. But it's I mean, you're exactly right. What happened was they basically restructured slavery. They essentially restructured slavery and came up with the sharecropper formula, which was nothing short of slavery. Just given another name in which they would rent land in exchange for labor, and you'd buy your supplies and everything from the owner of the land, who kept you in debt for the rest of your life, making you work extraordinarily long hours, still use the whip at times, still use force, still use the threat of physical harm and death. And that then moved easily into Jim Crow. Jim Crow, which kept Black people out of society. It kept you from gaining power. It kept you from gaining wealth. And then when those communities did gain power and wealth, quite frequently whites would destroy those communities. The Tulsa, Oklahoma massacre being
just one of many that we know that one, but there were many that aren't talked about.
A great
New
many,
Orleans.
Great
I
many.
mean, just the one thing that I've always been kind of interested with daytime TV generally, and is of all the media, it's always seemed to me that for some reason daytime is willing to take on issues before anyone else is willing to take them on. Whether it be biracial marriage or gay marriage, or back in the days of AIDS, it had the AIDS storyline quite early on. And it seems like, have you found that your Abe's character on Days has been able to address some of these issues and storylines? Have they done that?
Yeah, well, the story that, and I give Ron Calabardi, who's our head writer, credit for this, the story that I won the Emmy for, dealt with young black men being shot by the police, unarmed black men. And my son, Theo, on the show, was shot by a policeman who turned out to be his friend ultimately. But the story was a story that was in the headlines and is in the headlines every single day.
Right.
And it was a story that certainly had its controversies. But what he did that I thought was actually brilliant in many ways was because daytime TV is always wrapped in family, in stories. So no matter what the shows are, the four remaining shows, they all have their key families, usually multiples.
Right.
And it's always wrapped in families, and everybody is sort of related in one way or
Right,
another.
right. It's just shy of incestuous.
It's just shy of incestuous. Occasionally not so shy of it. And but and because of that, he made the story more accessible. And so I think a lot of people in the audience began, as they did before, they picked a side. I'm on the police officer's side. No. I'm on Black Lives Matter side. No. And but when he dealt with it as a human tragedy that had people involved as human beings, it made it more accessible. So you had people that felt the lines were clearly drawn, realized, wait a minute, they're not so clear.
Right.
And they're a little bit blurrier than I thought they were. And so daytime is able to do that. And also the practical fact that, there are over 200 shows a year.
Right.
So something's got to fill that time, over 200 hours a year to fill. And so you can't stay clear of the world as it is, but you are. But
they do seem to almost go out of their way to take that on in a way that there may be a nighttime movie of the week occasionally dealing with it, but daytime has always, if it's in the news and it's controversial and it needs to be discussed at the kitchen table, it pops up on daytime, and I have to give kudos to the medium of daytime TV that it's always been doing that, really unashamedly and fearlessly, and provoked conversation amongst exactly the sort of demographics that really need to be having those conversations. Whether it takes the seed, takes, I don't know, but they've never been shy of that, and
they haven't. They haven't. I think one place daytime has been shy and has been very slow, and that's in utilizing people of color both in front and behind the camera. You've had entirely white casts for shows at times. Only in the last 10 years or so have you begun to see cast and story that would focus on people of character, as opposed to being completely supporting to the white actors. Now in the last decade or so, you begin to see story built around the actors of color and those characters of color. That's beginning to happen. You still have an issue in the writer's room. You have a large issue in the writer's room. You still have issues in the director's booth and producing. These are things in the crews as well. So these are things that have to be addressed. Nighttime has taken larger steps in that than daytime has, and I think because daytime has a special place in entertainment. It's been with us forever, since the radio days. I think people feel closer to it. People that enjoy daytime, there's some kind of feeling that they have that makes
they feel very proprietary on it. They own it. It's their show. It's my show.
Exactly. The stories.
My stories. My story. I gotta watch My Story. True. Yeah, it's true, because Generations was a daytime show that you were on, and that was built around
Generations
Black
was
family.
the first and I believe the first and only daytime drama
Right.
built around a majority Black cast. And that was a wonderful show to do. I was very, very lucky to have been on that show. And it was a wonderful show to do. Great people. I loved it. They were very generous to me. They were very open. They reached out to the audience, and it's really unfortunate that it wasn't allowed to continue. And it was a victim of that subtle racism that has been around with us for forever. But it was the affiliates that shied away from that show, as opposed to giving it. Daytime shows need time to grow. And there have been daytime shows come and go since I've been on the air, since you've been on the air. And but other than Generations, I don't believe any has been given fewer than 5 years. And Generations was only given, I think, about 2.5 to 3 years.
Right.
And that's for daytime shows unconscionable, because you have to find
maybe
your
it's time
audience.
again. How long? When was that? 2000?
No, it's not 1990.
Oh, 90. So maybe it's time. Maybe that's something that needs to be revisited right now. There's certainly, because you've got sitcoms and the nighttime shows around African-American families and families of color of different nationalities, different races. So it seems to be now working in nighttime better than daytime. Maybe it's time daytime needs to revisit something like that.
I think it is time, and it fit perfectly. It's a half-hour show, and one of the often criticisms was it bled over into our noontime news. Well, you're always making adjustments for things. Things could have been done had they wanted to.
Had they wanted to.
Yes.
I want to talk about the other, I would think very thrilling honor that it was bestowed on you. You were one of the voted, or it was decided you were one of 105 most famous Kansans.
Yes.
Which must have been a thrill. I've been to Kansas a few times, Kansas City, to do theater there. There's a theater
That's
that
right.
I've been
Yes, I know.
twice.
I wanted to go see
so I spent time, and it's a lovely city. I love that city. I love Kansas City. It's got a lot of great, music and arts, and bang center in the country. There's a lot of different influences there.
And more fountains than the city of Rome.
And more fountains than the city. It's true. I know. I couldn't believe it. And then I started noticing them, and I was like, oh, there are a lot.
Yeah.
But that's very true. So you did you go to receive this honor? Were you there, or were you just told us?
I didn't go. I have. It began a relationship with the Kansas State Historical Society, and I sit on their board of directors. In fact, I was just at you were asking earlier about virtual meetings. I was just at a virtual board meeting a couple of weeks ago for that. And so I've been on that board now for a number of years. But at that point I wasn't, and it began that relationship. And what's very interesting, my wife points this out all the time. So they sent out a copy of the magazine. There are 2 or 3 magazines that are sent out monthly from the Historical Society. It's a wonderful historical society. Kansas is very history conscious, and it's a wonderful, wonderful group that does a lot of good work. But they sent out this magazine of all the famous Kansas, of which there are at least 105, but many, many more than that. So they had to knock it down. It was one from each county. There are 105 counties in Kansas. And there they are with Eisenhower and Amelia Earhart and Gail Sayers and all these great people of note. And I'm half the cover. Wait a minute.
Why not?
Shouldn't the president be?
Why not? Well, you're probably more famous. This is something I wanted to ask you too. But it's a factor of the times. You're probably more famous, more well known than Eisenhower was.
Well,
but I mean, being Abe Carver on Days of Our Lives for this amount of time. It's, and especially as it's shown, other than in America, it's now shown abroad. This is and I wanted to get to that about celebrity. There's something that I was not ready for. that, you know, you get on a daytime show in the 80s, particularly, that the
Yes.
level of celebrity, it's a small little backwater, but within that backwater, it's just humongous.
Yes.
And a bit of a shock. And some people handled it a lot better than others. Was it as much of a shock to you? And how did you deal with that?
Yeah, it was. It was particularly in the 80s. I mean, those are the halcyon days of
Right, the golden
daytime
age.
television.
Yeah.
I mean, that was extraordinary. Everything that came before and everything that came after is completely pale in comparison to the 1980s. That was, and so you have to throw that decade in there, because that was a
Right.
decade of
Yeah, it was.
excess
It was
in
the whole
every,
80s, right? It is
yeah,
the 80s. It was special,
yeah,
but
just complete excess, and
right.
in every way possible. So that played a role, I think, into all of us who were fortunate enough to kind of reach a level of celebrity during that time. I think the entire excess of the decade played into that, and that colors our perception, I think, as well. Yeah, I whenever I would run into it, it was. Uh, it was something that I found. I guess I was more awestruck than I was uh, concerned about it. I was at times I would sit around and wonder, wait a minute,
Yeah.
how did life get to here?
What is going on? Why are there 6,000 screaming people
Yes,
outside
exactly.
my hotel room?
Exactly.
What is going on?
What is going on? And I remember we were doing something in, I don't know if you were part of this or not, but we were doing something in Las Vegas at one of the big hotels in one of their big
Oh
auditoriums.
yeah.
It's had
Yeah.
10 or 12,000 people, completely packed. People, I mean, it was a Beatles moment, and
Right.
you know, literally,
Right.
completely packed. People, you know, signing autographs, and literally, that was the first time, I think, it has happened since, that a woman fainted in front of me, and
Right. And it's not like we even sang at those
no,
things. You
no,
know, you show up
we were just
and
there.
you wave and they
Yeah,
go, you know, James Reynolds, as you know, is Abe Carver, and you go, hi,
yeah,
hi, and everyone screams and faints, and you walk
yes.
off because you know you're not going to do a scene. You're not going to suddenly
You
do,
don't have to do
you
anything.
know, a scene. You don't
You're
do
gonna
anything.
say hello, maybe
Say
sign
hello,
something,
sign
maybe.
something, say hello, and get out of there. Yeah, it was. Oh, it's always, I've always thought it was just bizarre. And I look back on that, I always, you know, just laugh. It's just so strange that
I know.
level.
Well, I find celebrity to be an interesting thing. It's you know, and there certainly there are people I admire, and I will often say to them, "I'm a fan of yours," but I don't know
Right,
that I'm a fan in the way that fans might be of
right.
yours, or
You
maybe of
don't need to keep
me.
their chewing gum. You don't need
Yeah.
to find their chewing gum, wrap it up
Yes.
somewhere, and put it in a case in your bedroom.
I had a man pick
That's what
lint off
I
my
just,
clothes
I'll be a
once.
fan of someone's work. I'll get weak kneed if I see, especially athletes, if I see, you know, a Chelsea football player, I'm sure I would just start giggling like a little
Yes.
girl. But I would not want to keep their chewing gum. I wouldn't.
Yes.
I'd like them to sign my jersey or something, but I'm not going to try to find out where they live, or you know, pick their empty coffee cups out of the trash.
Follow them around town.
Yeah,
Yeah, all of
yeah.
that. So I had a man pick lint off my clothes once, and my wife was with me, and this was actually my
And you,
hometown.
I'm sorry, you what? You
A man that picked lint off my clothes, and
really?
I was I was in a store, and he walked up, and you know, and he came up and said, "You're on Days of Our Lives," and you know, went through the whole thing, and then of course, as men often have to do, he says, "But I don't watch."
Yeah, it's for
My
my
wife.
wife. Yeah, it's for my wife.
You've
Please
noticed
take
that
your
the men
lint.
have
Please
to
take
have
your
that
lint for my
disclaimer.
wife.
But he says, "Do you mind if I take this as a gift to my wife?"
And now tell me a bit about the theater. You and Lisa, your darling Lisa, you've been running the Fremont Center Theater for that. Was that the theater you started when we
Yes.
were,
Yeah.
you know, went on our vacation? You had a theater back then. Is that the same
Yeah.
one?
No, absolutely. Yeah.
And how's that
Yeah,
been
the
for you
Fremont Center
recently?
Theater.
How you presumably you were saying earlier that you know it's been really tough during COVID, not having anything. You can't do anything. Have you been finding it hard? You've been doing some Zoomy readings for the theater?
Well, we haven't. We've been lucky enough. We do own the building that the theater's in, and so we're the landlord. So that
Oh, so
does
you don't
help.
have to
There's
pay
another
anyone rent.
company called
Right.
Young Stars Theater that leases from us, and they do productions because there's a number of things that went on that I won't get into to bore you, but things have gone on with Equity, the union that regulates stage actors, and also COVID, and they have been very successful. Young Stars Theater, and largely they deal with young people and plays around young people, musicals. Very successful, and then sadly with COVID, you can't produce plays anymore. You literally can't. You can only you can't have an audience of more than 25 people, and they have to be socially distanced. So it really, you just can't do it.
Right. The economics don't work.
It's tough. They have been doing productions, virtual productions. They are they're doing Christmas Carol soon virtually, and
great.
they teach voice and they teach dance, and they're scrambling. They're doing what they can to keep it alive and keep their supporters and the kids to take their classes to keep them going. But it's a very difficult time for theater. It's a very difficult time.
It's difficult for a lot of people, which
Yes.
is kind of an apt segue, because we're going to switch gears a bit and talk a little bit about the fact that this is Giving Tuesday. And, if you guys watching have enjoyed these shows, this is a great opportunity to check out rfkchildren.org and check out what they do. And if you feel so inclined to support them, that would be fabulous.
Mm-hmm.
And James, you've done a lot of work for the Ronald McDonald House and for Veterans Affairs. You're very involved in a lot of charities yourself.
Yeah, we've been involved in a great many things over the years. For a long time, I worked as a spokesperson for the National Children's Hospital, which was also known as the National Jewish Hospital in Denver, Colorado, basically treating children with asthma. I was born with asthma and have had it my entire life, and that was a very natural thing. We then started doing an annual basketball game for the YMCA's locally in the Pasadena area. We did that for over 20 years. We also involved the Ronald McDonald House in that kind of fundraiser. One of the best times I've had, a couple of the best times I've had actually, for a long time I did tours with the USO and with Armed Forces Entertainment. I was in the Marine Corps, and I was asked to, in the beginning with USO, do tours overseas in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Kuwait, and different places around the world, which was wonderful. I loved doing that. I loved interacting with the troops. It reestablished a relationship with the military that I hadn't had for years, ever since I got out at all. And that led eventually to working for the Veterans Administration. And I was the spokesperson for hospitalized vets that also included volunteers for the VA. I believe they have almost 100,000 volunteers around the country, 25 million veterans. And the VA has had its critics, and some of that criticism is very well deserved. But what is often not expressed is the dedication of the people that work for the VA. I don't know that I've ever been, and I obviously have been with a lot of caring people and charitable organizations and people that are very, very dedicated to their work. But I don't know that if I've ever been around people that seem to care more than the people that work at the VA. They really do. I mean, totally unasked, they will tell you how they feel about the veterans, how strongly they feel about the work they're doing. That's pretty extraordinary. That went throughout. And yes, I'm somewhat of a visiting celebrity, but I never got the feeling this was a show that was being put on. Exactly. They volunteered this information, and it seemed to come straight from the heart.
But it's like, I'm going to bring on the RFK Children's Action Corps Director of Development, Anna DiBiase. Anna's coming on to join us now to answer some questions and talk to us a bit about this, because it's very much that sort of echoes what my experience of the RFK Children's Action Corps is, that the level of genuine love and caring and respect for these kids, and for giving them the opportunity to turn their lives around, or find opportunities that have been closed off to them. The amount of dedication these people show, people like Anna and Dana and everyone else, and Katie, is extraordinary, and it's why I got involved and why I stay involved with them. So thank you for joining us, Anna, and thank you for everything you do.
Thanks for having me.
I have a few questions that some of our audience has sent in. Here's one of them. I know that safety is a big concern when kids aren't going to school or coming into regular contact with supportive adults. How do your programs that have to operate virtually handle this? How do you deal with what needs to be a hands-on really with kids? How do you deal with that virtually when you can't be physically there?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. We've got a bunch of different programs, but so for the kids who are living at home in their communities, who are, in our community-based programs, or who go to school at our special day schools, they're all, connecting with our staff or their teachers virtually, like everybody else is kind of figuring this out. We're our staff are just being creative like everybody. So they're providing the virtual support, but safety is an issue. And so it's something that our staff are just, kind of talking about head on with the kids. And, if some kids may be in a situation where there might be substance abuse in the home, there may be domestic violence situations. So actively talking about safety and actually creating safety plans and talking about who they can reach out to, including the RFK staff themselves. So yeah, it's very important right now.
Right, and they don't have the benefit of any kind of outdoor activities to get them out of the house. They can't play sports, can't go play basketball. I know, Jim, you're very involved in that, giving kids the opportunity to play sports, particularly basketball. When that's taken off the table again, do you find sort of virtual games that they can play? Do you say, why don't we all get together online and do XYZ? Or do some of them not have access to the internet? In which case, what do you do then?
Yeah, those are all great questions. Pretty much some kids live with us in our residential programs. And so those kids, don't have the opportunity to get out and about, field trips, even to, take the bus to school. A lot of them are doing remote learning right in the residential area. So again, everybody's being creative, and the staff are really incredible. They're doing anything from, different musical activities virtually to artwork. Art has definitely played a big part, I think. I think for a lot of us in this time where it's sort of an outlet, a creative outlet to sort of process our feelings and kind of what we're going through. So the kids have been doing a lot of artwork. We've had some people who want to Zoom in and talk to the kids, like Laura Jill Miller, who was on one of these conversations. She's done a few sort of virtual visits with the kids where she does, she's a voiceover actress, and she's even done some like training and giving tips around voice acting and talking about that as a career. So we're just trying to be creative and keep kids feeling connected during this, what could be a really disconnected time.
Right. Because I guess, Jim, you weren't able to do your basketball games, right? Didn't you?
No, we haven't done it actually for quite some time, to be truthful. So,
sorry?
Yes, if we were still doing them, we wouldn't be able to do them now, but we moved on from that for quite a while. I miss those games. Those were great fun.
Oh, you moved on before now. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Everything has
it is an issue, but there is an opportunity to be creative. I mean, I do think, that's the thing, is rather than let this whole situation sort of beat us down, it's an opportunity to find alternatives. This is nothing to do with what we're talking about, but it is. Today, as I said, we went hiking up in up above Point Magoo, and we decided to go to, there's a great fish store on the PCH where you can get fish and chips. And usually you buy the fish and chips and then you sit on this wooden table right above the PCH watching the cars go by. And it's a sort of kind of, and you're crowded in with everyone else eating your fish and chips out of a basket. And because that was all closed, you couldn't sit anywhere. They weren't allowing you to do outdoor dining. You could just buy them and take them with you. So for the first time ever, we've been going to this place for years, decades. For the first time ever, we got it in our bag, crossed the PCH, and sat on the beach. And I said, this is so much nicer than sitting
that's not so bad.
over the freeway. And we would never have done it if it hadn't been for this pandemic shutting the tables down. We're like, oh my God, they've closed the tables. What can we do? Where can we go? And so I said, well, let's go across and sit on the beach. Oh, well, that's a good idea. So there are ways of getting around it and finding opportunities. Not that it's sort of relevant, but not particularly relevant. Listen, this has been so much fun. I want to thank you so much for joining us, Jim. It's been really so fun to touch base.
It's been a pleasure. Gosh,
I can't believe that we haven't sort of actually done something together. As soon as this thing's done with, we're going to go off for another vacation, the four of us.
Well, that would be wonderful.
I'd love to do that. Would you please give Lisa all our love too?
I will. You to Susan as well.
It's a big hug. I will. Absolutely. And
we
Anna,
do
thank
keep
you for
wondering,
joining us.
do we go to old or new places whenever we get a
I
chance
know.
to go?
We'll go anywhere. We'll go, like, nowadays it's all this Airbnb. You know, the thing with this pandemic is, you know, if you go with your family or a pod that you feel safe with, you know, you can go to one of these Airbnbs in the middle of nowhere and sort of hole up in the desert. My kids have done that a couple of times.
Oh, have they?
Just sort of disappear into the desert, into some, you know, remote Airbnb and just sit there for a week.
That's great. That's great.
There you go.
That's great.
But I think that's all we have time for today. But please, everyone who's been enjoying the show, do check out the RFK site. Hashtag Giving Tuesday. Help kids in need. It would be much appreciated, particularly right now. The kids need a lot of help and support. Jim, once again, thank you so much for joining us. Anna,
Thank you very much, and I'll be visiting
us.
the site and making a donation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. You take care now, and stay tuned for the next show when we've figured out what it's going to be, everyone.
That's right. Okay,
Bye-bye
thank you
now.
both.
Take care.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jim. Bye now. How do I get? Is it? Oh, here we are.
There we go. We can hit leave
I didn't know
studio.
whether to leave or stay.
Hi.
Yeah.
All
Great.
right.
That was very interesting, Jim. I learned a lot, actually,
Really?
from you. That was really
Oh, my
interesting.
goodness. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
That's always nice. That's always nice to know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank
I
you,
may have
Jim.
to
That was
call
so
you
good.
about
It wasn't too painful, was it?
StreamYard at some point.
No, that was great.
The only
That was great.
That wasn't
that
too
that
painful, was
fun.
it,
Thank
Jim?
you. Thank all of you for everything. That was fun.
That
Well,
wasn't too
we just
painful,
sat
right?
back and watched.
Wait. I think we're still live.
Oh, we are. Oh, well,
Oh.
that's good.